Good afternoon, this is David Wendell with BushcraftOnFire, and we're pleased to be with you for another video. Today we're going to do our third episode on our semi-permanent shelter. And I thought what we'll do today is to figure out a way to heat the shelter. Now we're going to be working up top because we're going to be working with some tools in order to build a small wood-burning stove for the shelter. And it's not going to be very expensive. I think we've got about $1.50 or $2 in materials. So let's show you what we're doing and show you how we're going to get about doing this. So how can you make a stove with a couple of tools, a couple of nuts and bolts, a hinge, and an old worn out air tank? Well, let me show you. What I did was I took this air compressor tank and I went down to my local garage and I had them cut out a hole. That hole is going to end up being the chimney hole, and I had them cut out a door plate. I came back and I filed this down with an angle grinder. All the edges are nice and smooth so I don't get cut when I'm going in there, and I drilled 2 holes. Those holes are going to be the hinge that fits on here for a door. Now this hinge is too big, so what I did was I just figured that I'd drill the 2 center holes out, and I can put 7/16 inch bolts right through those holes. Put a nut on there to hold that thing in place for a minute. Put my other one on there. And get my bolt put on there, and we'll tighten these down. 7/16 inch socket and about 10 seconds of torque, and we should have this in pretty good shape. Now what I'm using here are stove bolts. The reason I'm using the stove bolts is so they can withstand the heat of having a fire. Of course, I'm not going to have a fire in here that's 10,000 degrees or anything. We're just going to put a fire in here that's going to warm up the shelter, and that shouldn't take an awful lot. Alright, so there we go. We've got our hinge on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a plate to bolt this to, and that will be our door, and I'll probably do that out of an old can. But let me show you what else we can do with the tin can. On the top here, you remember that we have our chimney assembly. The guy butchered it up pretty well when he cut that out for me, but he did the best he could. So what I've done was taken a 1-pound coffee can, and you can see that with a pair of pin snips I've just come around and I've cut out that can, and I can fit that can. I had him pull up these 2 notches so that I could drill a small hole through here, and that can sits right on top of those notches, just like that. And then I'll go back once that I put the screws through there to hold that in place, and I'll put a little stove cement around there, and that'll make a nice airtight seal. So you can look inside there, see how that fits. You can see the 2 notches down on the either side that are going to go, and I'll have some small tapping screws that'll go through there, and that'll hold that can right in place. I probably wouldn't even need those screws on there, but I want it to be strong. On the top, what I did was I cut a circle as big as a spaghetti can, and then I made 3 little flanges here. You can see those. So the next thing to do is to make a chimney to go onto this, and let's go show you how to do that chimney, and then we'll come back to the assembly. Alright, what I'm doing right now is I'm making the chimney for the stove, and I've cut slits around the bottom of the can, and what will happen, you can see I've already done a few here, is that this can will fit inside this other can. One of the things that we want to make sure is that all on the inside of the uprights are coming up the same way. All the insides have to go in the same way. That way the smoke won't get trapped in there, but it'll come up. So I just put this inside of here, but before I do that, let me show you something about this. Now inside of this piece, and this is going to be the second to the bottom piece on top of the stove, I've put a kind of a little damper in there. What I've done is just taken a coat hanger, and that's the reason I'm making this the second up, because if I put it right by the stove that might melt. But you can see that it's got a little can lid in there, and I've bent the hanger in there so it grabs that lid and it goes around. Now when it's closed, then the handle's out. When it's open, then the handle's in line. So I've made it so that it will sit the right way, and that will be a damper for me on the stove. So I can close that, I can open that, and I've made it so it's just off center a little bit, and it grabs these ridges on the inside of the can, and that will keep that damper open. So I set it there, and you can see it stays closed. Then I turn it and it's open. So it catches that ridge, stays closed, open it up. So let me show you how to attach that on here. Remember that all of our closures want to go the same way, so I've cut those tabs. Now I simply fit them into the can that's going to be above it, and I press those into place, get them as straight as I can. That looks pretty good, pretty straight. Then I'm taking some stove cement and I'm just putting right around the crease there, and that'll make it waterproof and it'll help hold these things in place a little better as well. So I'm going to get this done and I'll be right back with you. Alright, once that I get this all in here, then I go back and I wet my finger a little bit, and it makes the cure time a little bit longer, but that's okay. It makes a nice smooth finish. Once I've done that, I can just go back with my rag, trim up the edge a little bit, just make it look decent. And there you go. My chimney's about done. Well, that piece is. And you can see now we're going to put one more here, and then we'll turn out and go out of the this shelter with the next one. So we're going to get this whole thing together up here, and then we'll take it down and see how it works in the shelter. One more thing that I'm going to do in honor of my brother Dave is I'm going to wrap this monster can. Just had an extra monster can. I'm just going to wrap it around there, and I'll put some of that glue in there. And that'll remind me of Dave while I'm sitting in the shelter. Dave, that one's for you.